I'm hoping you all got your cake and saw that amazing photo on the front of the cake. How do they do that? And we also have more cards for sale down here, so if you didn't get a chance to get a packet or two of the Tiffany Window cards, you may do that. And we also have ornaments from 2017, is that when they were, Jane? Yes, and those are also on the stage, and we're giving those out for free. So pick up an ornament that honors an anniversary, purchase some cards, get your cake, and let us pray. Beloved, gracious, wonderful God, you are present with us in every moment of our lives. Today we seek your blessing upon this historic, wonderful, active, courageous, loving congregation. May our life together always be a reflection of your love. Amen.
Thank you, Carla. Well, good morning, and welcome to this second part of a celebration of Pilgrim Church's 150 years. We're going to use the mural here as a visual reflection of those 150 years. I calculated it out. That's 150 years in 30 minutes or less, so that's 5 years a minute. So we should probably move along pretty quickly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use some material that Gail Trowbridge put together that provides background to the mural. And I'm going to talk from that mostly, and sometimes I'm going to use her words because she has much better words than I do. I'm then going to add some materials as well, some of which will come from this Pilgrim Congregational Church history from 1995, when we were starting to celebrate our 125th year. And then there's also on the website, you could find a wonderful history that's a little more concise than the one for the 125th that Mike Zalanis put together. So I encourage you to look at those. I'm going to share some elements of it today. So let's get started. I'm going to move over to this side. I got to take this with me, you know. Going to move over here. Because we're going to move, as you look at it, from left to right on the mural. And as you heard earlier, the congregation was formed. It was January 18th, 1871. And the mural then starts actually with, down here, the cornerstone of the first church. And that still exists. It's now on the northwest corner of the narthex in the current church. Going to move along. You see here a PCC, and that is a representation, of course, of Pilgrim Congregational Church, first seen in 1929. It's in the cookbook that Triss has in front of her there on the desk, and it's outside. It's also on Pilgrim's China, so if you could hold that up, please. Thank you, Triss. Vanna White, our own. Okay, so what I want to do, though, is to give a little background on the mural as well. It was painted in 2008, and with the participation of a number of people from Pilgrim. How many of you that are here currently participated in that? I know Triss and Ted, I did a little bit. I think, Don, maybe you did as well. But Ann Gumper, local artist and set designer, did this and coordinated it. It was actually in conjunction with Charlotte's sabbatical. We received as a congregation, and Charlotte received a grant from the Lilly Foundation to support the arts at Pilgrim Church, and Charlotte enriching her knowledge of the arts as well. So it was great to have that available. Some other things that are here, we start out and we see a runaway slave, and that depicts the efforts of Congregationalists through much of the 1800s to engage in anti-slavery activities. One of the activities that was most prominent was with the Armistad, and that was a slave ship where the slaves broke their chains and took control of the ship. The Congregationalists then were involved in trying to defend them in that court case that followed. Of course, we have here the Mayflower, discussed earlier. The Pilgrims, our namesakes, came over in 1620 and 1621 on that ship. And then we get, these are kind of background things, and we then get to our founder, Mr. Charles, the Reverend Charles Cotton Salter, and also the first church that is described here. This is Mr. Salter, Reverend Salter, and the first church. Those are from 1871, and we actually have someone available who knows more about that activity. So I'm going to invite the resurrected Mr. Salter to come forward and say a few things about that time now.
Thank you. As Mr. Falk announced, I'm Reverend Charles Cotton Salter. I was the first minister. Thanks, Deb. And I was here from 1871 to 1876, and then I came back and served another year in 1880. As you know, Pilgrim was established by Duluth pioneers, and Denny has told you about the first structure that we had. And it was in 1916 that Pilgrim Church bought lots here on 4th Street that then ultimately resulted in this church. Now, my middle name is Cotton. That's because I am actually a direct descendant of John Cotton, who was the lead religious person for the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So I'm a direct descendant of John Cotton, who died in 1652. So my ancestors were here 100 years before the American Revolution. I was born in New Haven, Connecticut in 1832, but I spent most of my young years in Waverly, Illinois. Waverly still has only about 1,500 people. My father was a dry goods merchant. A lot of folks in New England decided to come west, and Illinois was way west back then. And so that's basically where I grew up. But when I was 15, I went to St. Louis, and I taught Latin in a boys' school in St. Louis for 2 years. Then when I was 17, I went off to college at Yale. Graduated from there in 1852, went to Andover Theological Seminary, took a break and went back and was a tutor at Yale for a couple of years, and then graduated from Yale Divinity School, and then started with my first church in a small town in Illinois. Well, the Civil War came. So I was a chaplain with the Connecticut Regiment, and I spent most of my time down in New Orleans. And it was there that I started developing a lot of health problems that kind of stayed with me most of my life, on and on. I had some hemorrhaging in the lungs. I think now they would say that I had tuberculosis. But these difficulties came and went. When I was 30 then, after the war, and was 1862, and my physician suggested I try a different climate, that's why I came to Minnesota. True story. And so, 1863, I'm in Minneapolis. There's a small group of struggling Congregationalists, and they asked if I would help lead them start a church, which we did. That was Plymouth Congregational Church in Minneapolis. And so I was their first settled pastor as well. Then I had to leave in 1869 after being there 7 years because of health issues, and I went to the Holy Land. Now, there aren't many written records about what I did there, and it was so long ago I can't remember. But I was there for a couple of years, and then there was a request from some folks in Duluth, Minnesota, some Congregationalists. And my wife and I then came, and by that time we had a couple kids. We eventually had 5. But my wife and I were 2 of the 16 charter members of Pilgrim Congregational Church in Duluth. I then had health issues again and left in 1876 and went abroad and came back and worked at a church in Denver and worked at a church in Missouri, and then went back home to Waverly and rested, and then came back to Duluth. My wife and I had always really loved Duluth and the people. So I came back and spent another year at Pilgrim. Then I left in 1882 and was the pastor of the American Chapel in Florence, Italy. So I spent a bit of time there. But in 1887, my wife and I both wanted to return to Duluth, and that's what we did. And then I made a move. Instead of direct ministry with the church, I started the Duluth Bethel Society. I had good connections with the business community, and at that time Duluth was a pretty rough and tumble place because there were a lot of itinerant lumberjacks, itinerant sailors, a lot of saloons, and it was kind of a rough place, and it needed a lot. And so we started the Bethel Society. We had a coffee house, we had lodging rooms, we had programs for children and women, we had a kindergarten, we had a day nursery, we had cooking classes, and part of the reason was I was able to work very well with the folks that had money and the folks that didn't have money. And so I really tried to get everyone together because my basic attitude was, they're all children of God. God loves them all. Why shouldn't I do the same? I also started a Thanksgiving tradition. There were a lot of boot blacks, then you would call them shoeshine boys and newsboys. And I started a program where we would serve them a Thanksgiving dinner. It got to a point where there were 200 of these young men that would come and make sure that they were celebrated with a good meal. I died in 1897. I was 65 years old, survived by my wife and 5 kids. But during my funeral, or for my funeral, the city offices were closed, the county offices were closed, many businesses were closed, and I'm really proud of the fact that the saloon keepers decided to close the afternoon for my funeral. The Duluth schools even spent the morning of my funeral changing the curriculum, and what they did was they decided to have a discussion about lessons that could be derived from my exemplary life. My coffin was held at the Bethel. There were 3,000 people that ended up viewing it. Then there was a procession. The funeral was held at the First Methodist Episcopal Church in Duluth because that was the largest church at the time. It had 2,200 people. The newspaper reported they packed 3,000 people in. But as the procession came, and it was led by the city council and the mayor and so forth, it was estimated that 10,000 people honored me that day. But I was especially proud, of course, of the saloon keepers. The newspapers said, Duluth mourns the loss of a kindly Christian man and a gentleman, or lived for others, or a life spent in doing good to his fellow man. And the Duluth City Council said the following: we pass a resolution of regret upon the death of Charles Salter. He inspired sentiments of general sour universal regret. This council wishes to pay its tribute to the superlative merit of him that holds first place in the hearts of all. With his familiar voice and cheerful face, have lent hope and encouragement to thousands when other help was useless. He was endeared to all in every situation. His name is blessed alike by all classes. So that was the funeral, and when it was done, some folks wanted to make a monument, and so they raised some funds, and there's a bust of me above my grave on the hill at Forest Hill Cemetery. That's also where my wife was buried. She lived quite a few years after me on Woodland Avenue, and so she ended up being a resident of Duluth of 52 years. It was said of me that my happiness was found in helping others. And I think that basically was true. And as the mayor of Duluth said, there's only one opinion in regard to him: everybody his friend, and him the friend of everybody. I hope I'm invited back in 150 years for the 300th anniversary.
Well, thank you, Jack. As many of you know, Jack is an actor, and we typecast him to Reverend Salter. So obviously we got off to a good start with a great man, and from there we quickly grew as a congregation, and we needed a new church. So this first church was only occupied really for about 16 years. And then it was decided that we needed a much bigger church, and built one. That's depicted here in this second area. And that church was much bigger. It was had an audience, what they called the auditorium at that time, that held 750 people, and a balcony that held 250 more. So it was a magnificent structure. One difficulty was when they finished the church, they had a fire in a fire pit to keep it warm so the plaster could cure, and it caught on fire. The whole church burned down. So they had to then build it again, and that's why you see the fire here depicting that event. Up in the corner is a building actually from Oberlin College. And Oberlin was established in 1833. It was established by Congregationalists and people who were anti-slavery. They were noted because they enrolled the first women and the first African Americans in Oberlin. A few years later, they enrolled Jack Kemp, who's an alumni of that, of Oberlin. As you move along, here's the window. This is called the Monger Window. Those of you who have been in the chapel recently realize that that was moved from the second church, from the 1887 to 1915 church, and is now in the chapel. And Mrs. Roger Monger was one of the 16 original members of Pilgrim Church. Okay, moving along here, we see the first line of a song, hymn written by Isaac Watts, Our God, our help in ages past, and you will see the second line appears toward the end of the mural here at the last part of it. You also see the choir that's located right up here. Music has been a strong tradition at Pilgrim Church since its inception. And we've had a number of very talented musicians. We saw some of them playing bells this morning, and we have an organist who is very accomplished as well and have a history of that. Perhaps the person who best epitomized that is Ruth Alta Rogers, Miss Rogers, who was the organist and the choir director, music director for 45 years, from 1919 to 1964. Any of you know Miss Rogers? Okay. Okay. Took piano? That's wonderful. Terrific connection. Okay, as we move along then, we're going to see a depiction of part of the Tiffany Windows here. And Pilgrim is very fortunate to have 5 sets of Tiffany windows in the sanctuary, the part along the alley, and then one of them towards 23rd Avenue East on the 4th Street side. And those came to being, we believe, because of Julius Barnes. He had a shop, or he had an office just down in New York City, just down the road from the Tiffany Galleries. And when he was there on business, he said, that'd be a nice addition to Pilgrim Church. So he funded the early windows and dedicated them to his parents. Then I'm looking at Carolyn, whose great-grandfather, William Heggert, also funded one of the windows, and in honor, I think, of his good friend Charles Duncan. Is that correct?
Yes, well, actually, he had died, so like, Jack was speaking in present terms about Charles Salter. My great-grandparents were very involved with this church, and actually, I I brought today, I found in my silverware drawer a silver spoon with the engraving of the second church building on here. So this is kind of cool. I use it every morning with coffee. So actually, Mr. Duncan, Charles Duncan had died, and my great-grandfather, William Gustav Haggart, had died in 26. Mr. Duncan, a few years before, they were best friends. And my great-grandmother, Jessie, decided she wanted to dedicate a Tiffany window to her now deceased husband. So she went to the Tiffany Studios in New York and picked out the window, which is the one that's the farthest forward on the left-hand side, which I'd like to say seems to be everyone's favorite window. And then when she came back from the Tiffany Studios with what she had selected, she heard that Mrs. Duncan, her good friend, also wanted to do a window for her deceased husband, and so great-grandmother offered to have Mrs. Duncan go in with her for the purchase of the window. So I've got to tell you all, I get personally offended when people refer to the window as the Duncan window instead of the Duncan Haggart window, because Mrs. Duncan merely wrote a check.
Thank you, Carolyn. It's a wonderful story, thank you. We have other stories about windows as well. This window is from the Woodridge Windows. Those are the ones that are, again, along the alley further back in the sanctuary. And they're the four apostles. One of those apostles, Matthew, has 6 toes. So if you take a look here, they're depicted, the 6 toes. At one point, the church had note cards that they were selling, kind of like we do the Tiffany windows now. Those had pictures of the toes, something like that, and they were called footnotes. So. Okay, so let's move along here. Way down at the bottom here, you can see some symbols of different religions, Catholic, Muslim, Jewish, and so forth. And what that depicts is the fact that Pilgrim Church has always been involved in ecumenical activities. Jack, you were involved very much in the Arrowhead Interfaith Council, I believe. Our current involvement in CHUM is, again, ecumenical, with people, with denominations from around the city being involved in that. Carla mentioned that not all of the activities of the church are easy. And the one that probably was the most difficult is depicted here. You see there's a path, a journey that is followed here. And here the path separates. And the reason is that in 1964, the 6th vote on whether or not to join the UCC was taken. So they'd have 5 previous votes, and none of those had been favorable in the terms of joining the UCC. So in this vote, the vote was 304 to 291 to join the UCC. And Bill Halfaker, who was the minister at the time, said, we got to settle this somehow. Let's, because it had gotten in the way, quite honestly, of the church's mission. The controversy about whether to join or not. So the Pilgrim did join then and become Pilgrim Congregational UCC, United Church of Christ. 146 individuals left the Pilgrim, though, and then went and joined Duluth Congregational, created that church. Happy to see some of them back. But certainly, some significant controversy, conflict that existed at that time, not something to be glossed over. I remember I was doing a history, I was asking people about the history of the church at one time, and I asked them, what are the significant events in the history of the church? This is probably in 1980. And we went 20 minutes before anybody mentioned the split. I found that to be very interesting. Moving along, up here, we have 2 images from the Roberts window, which is at the front of the church. And this is one that celebrates education. seeking truth. And these are then two symbols of that. Many of the symbols in the church right at the center are of institutions of higher education. Certainly Pilgrim has been involved with those, and the Congregationalists and the UCC even more so. Oberlin is one of them that's depicted, also Yale, Mount Holyoke, and several others, including Fisk and Northland. So been a very important part of the history of this church is the emphasis on education. Moving along, we go to the bells. And there's big bells, smaller bells, handbells. And I was excited today to see the handbells back performing. It was wonderful to see that. Sure enriches our services. The bigger bells, I think, represent the carillon. In the bell tower, there were bells at the time. Jane, you're nodding and saying, yes, they were. What I read said that they were played Sunday mornings at 10:15. They started in the mid-50s and went for a couple decades, I think. They weren't playing by the time I got here in 1977, but an important part of the neighborhood up until that point. Continuing, we can see some pipes from the Jakel organ that was completed in 1988. A magnificent instrument. Internationally known people from around the world have come to play that organ, and it's been featured on things like NPR's Pipe Dreams. So certainly a well-respected musical instrument. Below the organ here, you see some of the costumed celebrants of the Christmas story. I fondly remember when our kids were growing up that they would dress up as angels and shepherds and so forth and tell the Christmas story in various ways. I see people who've probably participated in that over the years. I'm glad that they are here today to help celebrate. So, special part of the church's history. Down below here, you see the silver. For special occasions like installations of ministers and so forth, we take out the silver and celebrate in a more formal way. Move along as well, come to instrumentalists. We've been blessed over the years to have people who have provided instrumental accompaniment and really performances in the context of worship and then outside as well. We had one this morning. Thank you, Christopher. It was great to have you play the trumpet. Up here we see a couple of three different images, and I'll talk about each in succession. The first one is the prayer shawl. So this green part here, that's a prayer shawl, and this was a ministry of the women of the church. And what they would do is to provide a prayer shawl for celebrations in life and also losses in life. So it was something you could wrap yourself into and feel comforted by the congregation. I see it as representative as well of the congregation coming around when people are in difficult times in life and times when they want to celebrate. So people gather around. Maybe we don't have a shawl currently, but we still have the goodwill of the congregation. You also see a dove there. Dove is the Christian symbol of peace. We became a Just Peace Church back in 1988, and we continue on that ministry through the Social Justice Committee at this point. Jack, I think we're here when we became a Just Peace Church. There's also then the rainbow flag. This describes, we did in 2002 become an open and affirming congregation, and before that time we were very involved in an ecumenical effort on opening our doors. And this is then emphasizing that we need to celebrate people of all different sexual orientations, gay, lesbian, transgender, and bisexual. Just under the flag up there then, you see some hands with a piece of bread or a loaf of bread. And that represents the fact that we have open communion. Everyone is welcome to take communion. And regardless of your age or whether you're a member of this church or this denomination, everyone is welcome. I'm going to move over a little bit then, take the... You see over here the the finish of the first line of the song that started, the hymn that started over there, our hope for years to come. And we're moving now towards the present and looking into the future. So one thing you see here is the globe, the world, and Pilgrim has been very involved over the years in international kinds of activities. So we supported a family who provided missionary services in Turkey for many years. We supported Ray Phillips for, I think, 39 years in South Africa. And he did a number of things to improve the life of that society, including starting a club that Nelson Mandela participated in, and other leaders who I don't know, but are very prominent as well. You see the gifts here. One of the things that we've done over the years is to buy gifts that went to women's transitional housing or other places around the Christmas season. So that's another legacy here. And part of what it does is depict the kinds of good works that Pilgrim has done in the community over 150 years, really. The history that's written up in the books that I've seen just demonstrate the remarkable things that Pilgrim has done. Down here we see some hands, people reaching out in a teacup, again emphasizing hospitality. And at the bottom here, this is something I just learned not too long ago, that these are hand flowers that were that depict Pilgrim's involvement in preschool education with the Chester Creek preschool. And I noticed, I heard that there's a very direct connection. Whose hands are those? So thank you for contributing to the mural as well. So the Beasters were there as also. So we'll keep moving on here. Here's one of the carved angels. There's 4 of them, and they show up right now when you look at the streaming video, because often it's behind the minister who's at the lectern. It's wonderful to see. These were actually carved by a guy named Anton Lang, who worked with the American Seating Company out of Michigan. But in the off-season, when he wasn't carving angels, he'd go over to Mcgonigle, and he played Christ. So he was known around the world, not so much for his carving, but certainly for his portrayal of Christ in a very famous Passion play. If we move further here, we see a young baby held by an older person. One of the things that I've really enjoyed about Pilgrim is the intergenerational nature. It's the place in my life where I get together with people of all ages and really enjoy that. There's the baseball player here. For years, Pilgrim had a team known as the Pilgrim Turkeys. And while that's not the most maybe prestigious name, I was just looking up this morning, they've got 4 trophies up there for first place in their division in the Duluth Church League. So very successful, both from the point of view of success on the field, but also the camaraderie that was developed around that. You'll notice the open door here. And that emphasizes, wherever you are on life's journey, whoever you are welcome here. So that's one of the things that was present there. And then you go off into the future, and you see, first of all, a depiction of the nature. We're lucky to be surrounded by a beautiful environment here, and our care for the environment, which is something we've emphasized recently in the building. So replacing windows that didn't hold the heat in very well, replacing the old bulbs with LEDs, and just in general trying to be good stewards of the environment with this building and in other ways as well. So we are going to then be moving into the future, and what I would like to do is to first of all tell you how we have thought in this congregation and in this denomination about the future. One is, if you look really carefully, you can find 20 commas in this mural. Anybody see a comma? Can you point one out?
In the text up here.
Text. Where now? Up here?
Yeah, after the word come.
Come, okay? So here's a comma. That's an example, thank you. There's also a question mark that occurs later on. And what that emphasizes is that we have had, over the years, a statement of who we are that says God is still speaking. It comes from Gracie Allen of Burns and Allen, and she said, never put a period where God has put a comma. So God is still speaking. I'm also going to go and see if I can find, I can't remember the exact quote, but John Robinson, as the pilgrims were leaving.
There were light and truth to break forth from God's holy word.
Okay, so more light and truth to break forth on God's holy word. So that's, again, saying that we can continue to change and we transition. We've laid a firm foundation with 150 years of history, but then we are going to be moving on as well. And as one way of talking about that, I'd like to invite Charlotte Franz to come forward.
Is this the moment?
This is the moment.
All right, all right. Carla, oh, come here. I am so glad that you are here. I really appreciate, more than you would ever know, the opportunity to be here for your installation last week and now for this celebration. And I have to tell the rest of you that standing and sitting up front and looking out in the congregation, I saw a lot of folks that aren't here, but their spirits were here. And I started naming them. It was like Carolyn Lee and the Fifields and Werner and Mila Zentner. I mean, just so many people I saw in those pews this morning. And my heart is really, really full. So thank you. I love this congregation. It wasn't always easy, and we had some major work to do that I never anticipated because a lot of what happened to the building happened while I was here. And I never saw myself as a minister who would be in charge of any kind of building projects. Thank God for Mary Saposi, because I wasn't a minister in charge of a building project. But that all happened while I was here, and that really took a lot of energy. But there were also other kinds of wonderful things that happened, including trips to Mexico and trips to Guatemala, including Hogwarts for the community, including a $10,000 gift from this congregation to the Benedictine Center that's now Sheila's place, and a lot of volunteer work that went on rehabbing that building. So my best to you and to this congregation as you continue. I have a very small legacy gift to give you. There's a woman who is in this congregation who is very supportive and wonderful, who was cleaning out her closet and gave me a sweatshirt, which I want to pass on to you, but for a particular reason. I found this extremely helpful because I wore it to places in the community where I wanted Pilgrim to show up in sort of a quiet way, but meaningful way. So this sweatshirt has gone to Clayton Jackson McGee celebrations and observances. It's gone to Chum events. It's gone to news press releases about significant things in our community. And it was just kind of one of those, not real flashy, but obvious ways in which I could show up on behalf of this congregation. And so, from Beth Brown to me to you.
Good old sweatshirt.
So thank you very much for listening to the 150 years and thinking about how we are now transitioning into a new era. We also have, Carla has some messages from other former pastors that she would like to read, so I'll get this set up here.
Good. Thank you, Denny. So I sent an email and snail mail request of a good number of former ministers and minister friends of the congregation, and not all of them responded. We're all busy, but a good number of them did, and some of them I want to read. I also just was sitting here when you mentioned Bill Halfacre. Bill was a trustee at Northland College, where my father was president, and my father counted Bill Halfacre one of his closest friends. So it's really, to have his name come back in this way is especially wonderful. So this is from Liz Ettinger. First of all, congratulations on 150 years of ministry. It is a significant milestone. I have so many wonderful memories of my time with you. I was the first woman minister for the congregation. There she is. You were my first congregation, so there was a lot of learning on both sides. I feel fortunate to have worked with both Dr. Shepard and Jack Fitzgerald. The trustees and church council could not have been more helpful as I navigated between being associate minister and interim senior minister twice during my 6 years in the congregation. But what I remember most about my time with you was how individual congregation members became essential teachers and role models to me. I came to Pilgrim thinking it was my job to teach and provide pastoral care to the congregation. I soon realized that ministry was very much a two-way street. I have two stories of my time there that stand out. First, both my daughters were born when I was serving Pilgrim. It was a first for the congregation as well, and it was a new challenge for the trustees and the church council to deal with questions about maternity leave and having a crib, often a baby in it, in my office. But we navigated it, and I'm grateful to all those who helped me blend motherhood and ministry. But the memory which stands the most to me about congregation members being essential teachers was an afternoon when the Women's Fellowship was working on the church bazaar. One element of the bazaar was making dozens of apple pies to sell. Pie making day was a major event, and I loved being able to put in my time helping with peeling, chopping, and baking. One year, baking day got changed by a day. I didn't think much about it, just went down to do my part. And as the afternoon unfolded, several women started making arrangements to go out to dinner and a movie after the day's pies were done. And in a quiet moment, one of the older women said, "Today is the anniversary of my husband's death." All of a sudden, I realized why pie-making day had been changed, and all those evening plans were being made. The church women had planned the pie-making, the dinner, and a movie, so that a bereaved widow would not be alone on the anniversary of her husband's death. This was ministry at its most holy. All those women getting together to take care of a grieving friend. That day humbled me. It was a profound teaching moment, schooling me to know that real, thriving ministry was not just the work of clergy, but of the body of the church. It was a profound teaching event for me as a rookie minister, and it changed me in a way that carried through my entire ministerial career. So thank you, Pilgrim Church. I do that all the time, you know, because I used to serve Plymouth, so you know that. Anyway, me and Dr. Salter, we both have done both. So thank you, Pilgrim Church. I will always hold you in my heart with gratitude for all you taught me about ministry. From M. Finney. M, who is in the very serious battle with cancer that has moved to her brain. So her message is short. And I know we'll hold M in our dear prayers. Congratulations and blessings on you, Pilgrim Church, on this your 150th anniversary. And there you are with my dear friend Carla Bailey as your minister. I have many memories and stories from Pilgrim, but one stands out. It was the year on the 4th of July, Carla's birthday, by the way, when all the fireworks, the whole show, was ignited at one time. Do you remember that? Rather than an hour of hearing oohs and ahs sounding by the lake, it was like a big bomb with lots of lights. Love to you all, and especially Carla M. From Jennifer Garrison Brownell, grace and peace to you. I was so grateful to receive Reverend Bailey's request to join you for our 150th anniversary, even if I can only be there by letter. I recently was packing to move and found a photograph of our confirmation class. We all looked pretty uncomfortable with our 1980s hairdos, tall bangs for the girls and mullets for the boys. Dressed in our best clothes, smiling somewhat stiffly for the photographer. None of us look all that good, frankly, but when I found the picture, I could not stop smiling at our young faces. That photograph reminded me that at Pilgrim Church, we did not have to be beautiful or talented or even all that well-behaved to know that we were loved by you, dear congregation, and by God. Our experiences worshiping by the light of the Tiffany Windows, going on retreat to a cabin on the Brule, hanging out in the boiler room, which was the youth room for a while for some reason, helped us to grow in knowledge of the love of the living God, even when we were too young to articulate it. Our adult mentors affirmed us, even when we were too awkward to affirm ourselves. Pilgrim Church was my safe place in those potentially unsafe teen years. I was mentored and taught, challenged and accepted. I know Pilgrim Church laid the foundation for me to become an ordained minister myself. In these strange and difficult times, when churches are shrinking and wringing their hands about post-pandemic worship protocols, take heart, Pilgrim. The seeds you are planting today will sprout in the future in ways you cannot now know. Celebrate the past with joy and thanksgiving, but as you do, look also to the future with hope and curiosity as you place your trust in the resurrected Christ, who was with us then, is with us now, and will be with us always. With love, Reverend Jennifer Garrison Brownell. From John Pegg. Greetings, Pilgrim friends. I send best wishes for a joyous celebration of your 150th anniversary, along with prayers for many wonderful and meaningful ministries in the next 150 years. It has been more than 30 years since I served briefly as an interim associate minister there with my esteemed friend and colleague, Jack Kemp, following my time as pastor of Peace, UCC. As I reflect back on those days, I was blessed to know and minister with some wise and wonderful elders at Pilgrim. I was fortunate to have shared many hours visiting and dining with Mary Mcgonigle Roberts, a woman ahead of her time. She told stories about growing up in Duluth, living for a time at Glen Sheen Mansion, then heading out east to a private women's college and returning home as a liberated woman to challenge many of the cultural norms of her day. Mary had a broad and visionary worldview and a generous heart. Mary Van Evera was, am I saying that correctly? Evera? Van Evera? Somebody know? Evera was another wonderful, progressive, and community-minded spirit. I remember planning and attending events hosted by her in her home for the young progressive educator from Northfield and his first run for the U.S. Senate, Paul Wellstone. Pilgrim Church has been blessed with many generous and open-minded community leaders over the years. May it continue to provide that kind of vision and leadership for the community well into the future. And finally, from Karen Schuder, dear Pilgrim members, congratulations to you as you celebrate 150 years as a congregation. I pray you experience God's Spirit as you remember your history and look towards your fine future ministry. With deepest blessings, Reverend Dr. Karen Schuder.
Thank you, Carla. Jackie reminded me that I missed a few things going through on the symbols here, and one of them I missed was the image of, I think of it as being Liz. Tris, do you think that looks like Liz? Yeah. Anyway, Liz Ettinger. And one of the real strengths of our congregation throughout 150 years has been women's leadership. And glad to see that represented here. Sorry, I jumped over it earlier. So again, part of what we can see from 150 years is we really have a great foundation in moving forward. And we have a transition now and new leadership and looking forward to the next years.
I want to thank you for the gift you've given us today and the gifts you've given this church for decades. There's no one I was happier to see do this history and no one that's ever been more dedicated to this church. Thank you. I love you.
So I hope you take cake with you, because there's a lot of it. So I just want to offer a final prayer and blessing as we go forth from today's celebration, knowing that after today we start the season of Advent, which is liturgically a new beginning. So let us be grateful for the past and look with joy to the future. Let us pray. We ask your blessing upon us, O God, as we continue to do your work, as we open our hands and hearts to the world so in need of both. Guide us as we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. Let us run now the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. Guide us in all we do and be with all the people of this church as we carry on for the next 150 years and more. Amen.